Welcome back. You're watching France 24. Coming up, more than 250,000 march against pension reform on day one of strikes in France, with clashes in several cities, including Paris. Transport stoppages rolled over at least through Friday. It's official. The U.S. House of Representatives to draft articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. The formal charges to be spelled out in the coming days. Samoa shut down for 2 days in order for the Pacific Island nation to vaccinate against the measles. An epidemic there has already claimed 62 lives. It's Emmanuel Macron's biggest challenge since the Yellow Vest movement of a year ago. Marches in more than 40 cities against the French president's pension reform plan. Most of it peaceful. At Paris's Place de la République, clashes breaking out on the sidelines of the finish of the big march in the capital. This starting before nightfall and then continuing on. The strike a success with transport halted, schools shut. Even the Eiffel Tower was closed. Let's cross to Place de la République. France 24's very own Clovis Casali is there. What's the latest?
Well, I can tell you marchers, demonstrators are still marching towards the Place de la Nation, chanting slogans such as Emmanuel Macron, we are here, we will not give up the fight, we are here to demonstrate and to show you that you need to cancel your planned reform of the pension system. You have people of all professions. You've got teachers, you've got firemen, you've got even policemen, and you've got people from the private sector. Demonstrators here also want the private and the public sector to unite to show their opposition to the French government. And I'm now joined by a student, because you also have a lot of young people here taking part in the march. Isabelle, you're a science student. Tell me why it's important for you to be here today for this march.
Well, as a student, I'll probably be the one who will have this pension reform. So I think it's very important for young people like us to demonstrate that we have solidarity with these people, because these pension reforms will probably impact our future. So I think it's fairly important to, as the younger generation, to show the support we have for these kind of social movements.
And there were fears of clashes, of violence today. What have you seen today in this march, taking part in this demonstration? How would you describe the atmosphere?
I think this demonstration was fairly peaceful. I heard there was a few cars that were burned, but I did not see any demonstrations of violence like we've seen with the Gilets jaunes last year. And this time it was very peaceful, and people were kind and polite. But it's only my personal view. But I'll say that this time it was very peaceful and calm.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. The security had been beefed up, of course, 6,000 police forces, and you can see some of them here, and there were like roadblocks in various parts of the French capital. 6,000 forces here to make sure that there were no clashes like in previous demonstrations with the Yellow Vests.
Yeah, Clovis, you also had the trade unions with their crowd control units. This is day one, and the question we'll be putting later in the France 24 debate, and I'll put it to you, is what happens if it snowballs, this movement?
Well, that's the fear of the French authorities, of course. The fears of the French government, of President Emmanuel Macron. This is the biggest demonstration possibly that he is facing during his presidency, the biggest social movement, if you will. Demonstrators here have one dream, and that is to go back to 1995, when their mass demonstrations prevented the French government and the Prime Minister at the time, Alain Juppé, of carrying out his reform of the pension system. Interestingly enough, the current Prime Minister, Édouard Philippe, well, his political mentor is precisely Alain Juppé. And here, demonstrators say that Emmanuel Macron, who was elected on a center-left possibly left-wing agenda manifesto. Well, Emmanuel Macron has turned too much towards the right-wing electorate. That's what some demonstrators here are saying. And when we were talking with Mohamed Farhat to these demonstrators, they all said that Emmanuel Macron represents the rich French people and not defending the interests of the middle classes. And that's a huge disappointment for a lot of the demonstrators here. And they do not believe what Emmanuel Macron says. Emmanuel Macron, the president, says that he wants a fairer system, more justice in the pension system, a universal one. He wants to end the so-called special regimes that the people here, teachers, firemen, and many other professions, feel that they're going to lose out with the reform planned. Bear in mind also that we don't know exactly what the reform will be. There are more consultations and negotiations taking place with the trade unions in the coming days, in the coming weeks, and then we will know what the exact reform is. And that's why demonstrators here want to pile up the pressure on the French government.
All right, Travis Kazani, we're seeing behind you, by the way, a lot of bicycles and those electric scooters. A reminder that the Paris Metro is going to be mostly shut again on Friday. Thanks for that live update. We'll be talking about it more in some 30 minutes' time in the France 24 debate. In Washington, the formal announcement, the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives directing the Judiciary Committee to draft articles of impeachment against Donald Trump, the U.S. president accused of pressuring his Ukrainian counterpart for political dirt on potential 2020 re-election rival Joe Biden.
Pushing for the exit of President Donald Trump. On Thursday morning, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi delivered this unusual public statement on the status of the impeachment inquiry into the president.
Sadly, but with confidence and humility, with allegiance to our founders and a heart full of love for America, today I am asking our chairman to proceed with articles of impeachment.
Impeachment hearings began in the House earlier on Wednesday, with legal experts summoned by both parties to discuss whether Trump's efforts towards Ukraine met the constitutional bar for impeachment. The House now finding the testimony sufficient to proceed.
The president has engaged in abuse of power, undermining our national security and jeopardizing the integrity of our elections. His actions are in defiance of the vision of our founders and the oath of office that he takes to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Trump was once again in defiant mood on Thursday, taking to Twitter to lambast the Democrats, claiming they had no case and were preventing him from cleaning the swamp. Should the motion pass through the House, it will then be taken to the Republican-controlled Senate, where it will face a final vote. Only if 2/3 of the Senate find the president guilty of impeachable offenses would he then be removed from office.
And for more, we're joined by our Chief International Affairs Editor, Robert Parsons. Only the fourth time in history that the procedure to remove a U.S. president has been launched. None, by the way, which has been successful to date.
None successful. One for Andrew Jackson back in 1868. Johnson, sorry, came within one vote of getting that 2/3 majority that's needed. And that's why it's so difficult. You need 2/3 majority. It's only 4 times in the history of the United States has that happened. Only 2 sitting presidents have actually been indicted. That was Clinton, of course, and Johnson we referred to just now. So, it really is rare. So, it's obviously not good for Donald Trump that this possibility exists that he will be indicted. We're not there yet, of course. The vote has to take, first of all, there have to be the articles of impeachment that the House of Representatives has to put forward. Then that has to be voted on.
Could happen early next week.
But yeah, it could happen before Christmas. That seems to be one possibility.
The full vote.
Before the Christmas recess. They may not get a majority. Some Democrats may decide to vote against it, but it looks pretty likely that it will go to a trial in the Senate. And it's pretty clear that in a trial in the Senate, where the Republicans have a majority, that it will be turned down, that there will be no impeachment of Donald Trump. But that's not necessarily the end of the matter.
No, because then it plays out in the court of public opinion, what with
Precisely.
the first primaries in January.
Yeah, precisely. And that, I think, is what it's all about. I don't think the Democrats harbor any reasonable doubts about the outcome of a trial in the Senate against Donald Trump, when we've seen just how bipartisan U.S. politics has become over the last decade or so, including under Obama. So, that's what it's really about. The court of public opinion, as you put it, an election coming up, first primaries. They're hoping, the Democrats, that this will play out badly for Donald Trump. That, of course, the core support of Donald Trump would not be affected, but the waverers who are looking at this and having doubts about the direction in which the United States is going, both internally and externally, and they've been seeing foreign leaders laughing at Donald Trump at the NATO summit, thinking, is this really the United States leader that we want? That's what they're hoping. Whether or not it'll play out that way, of course, is another matter.
All right, many thanks for that, Robert Parsons. The lockdown has begun in the Pacific island nation of Samoa. 2 days for medical teams to go door to door for compulsory measles vaccinations. The epidemic there has claimed the lives of dozens of children.
Samoa is in the grip of a deadly measles epidemic, and the red flags are there to alert medical teams that a person inside needs a vaccine. To cope with the crisis, all businesses and non-essential government services have shut for Thursday and Friday, and only public health teams are allowed on the roads.
And one of the major reasons for our drive today for 2 days is to ensure that we can eliminate as many, if not all, of our population. But the problem is we have been handicapped by our drive because we have so many anti-vaccine people.
Before the epidemic, only 30% of the island nation's population were vaccinated for measles. That's well below the internationally recommended rate of 90%, meaning Samoa was particularly vulnerable to an outbreak. Now, however, people are queuing up to be immunised, something that pleases the newly crowned Miss Samoa, who also works as a nurse.
But I'm also very grateful that they are open to being vaccinated. A lot of them have heard the word and are now realising the importance of being vaccinated. So we are very impressed.
Cases of measles are on the rise across the world. Experts blame the increase on families who shun the vaccine because of fears debunked by medical science that the injection can have a negative secondary impact on a child's health.
As heavy rains continue to batter East Africa, authorities in Burundi say landslides there have killed at least 28, with a toll that could rise, with many people missing. The landslides reported in Cibitoke province in the northwest. At least 58 drowned off the coast of Mauritania. A makeshift boat carrying some 150 potential migrants sinking after taking off from Gambia. The vessel set out a week ago, hoping to reach Spain's Canary Islands. It ran out of fuel and sunk off the coast of the Mauritanian city of Nouadhibou. That's according to the International Office for Migration. The long and winding road to peace in Africa's newest nation, South Sudan's previously warring factions, now promising a unity government by next February. We're not there yet, though, and still over 2 million South Sudanese live in exile, mostly in refugee camps in neighboring countries. They're playing a wait-and-see game before they decide to return. It's a France 24 report read by Julia Steers.
This family fled to Kakuma after the outbreak of civil war in 2013. Recently, Masmina wanted to go back to her country and to her village, but there found only ruins. Most houses were destroyed, and she had to go back to her life as a refugee in Kenya.
When I wanted to go to my field, there could always be someone on the road waiting to shoot me and kill me. And it was the same thing when I went to fetch wood. I'm afraid of insecurity in South Sudan.
For the majority of South Sudanese refugees, it's still unimaginable to return, despite the peace agreement signed in September 2018. Fighting has eased, but the prospect of a return to civil war hangs heavily over the country. Some have decided to take up a trade so they can at least work in the camp. Here, young people are trained to become entrepreneurs.
I could find a job in South Sudan, but someone could come and kill me. It's important for me to find work here in the camp. It's better here. I'm not in danger. Nobody can threaten me with a weapon, unlike there in South Sudan.
The NGO giving these courses recently co-published a report about the difficulties faced by refugees who'd rather go home.
It requires the effort of authorities in South Sudan, agencies working here on the other side, to be able to ensure that this confidence is built in terms of their safety, being able to go back, existence of basic services.
To fulfill the peace agreement, a unity government is set to be announced in February. But for these refugees, many fear the deal could collapse, plunging their country back into civil war.